boroscope in behind panels and look at those, to work mainly in the lobby area, but actually look in some other areas where practicable. The notion of actually going through and actually finding some of these issues would have been to actually go through and lift panels off the side of the building, and the cost to undertake that due diligence process was huge. The last piece of the puzzle, I suppose, is when it comes to, in hindsight, looking back compared to where we are today, we do know that the valuation on the building has gone up significantly. Yep. We do know that people find it a very attractive to building, and unofficially offers are coming to us to talk about the notion of what you've just said, which is buying. So part of the alternative financing discussion you've started now is to look at things like our property portfolio and actually say, what are the options available? Yep, very good. What we can say is, as I mentioned, structurally the buildings are very sound. It is meeting the needs of what we bought it for, which is to actually significantly change the way offices are working. The efficiency gains are huge. The ability to actually build in the environmental considerations are worked very, very well. So it is functioning very, very well for what was intended.
So the supplement to that question was on the 25 million, one of the smartest things that could have been done was to put in smart lifts. If you look at the loss of productivity because of us queuing on the floors each day and stopping off at every level, when all modern buildings today, and it was one of the issues that was raised at the time, have smart lifts. You know, 25 million, you would have thought that that might have been a consideration given how much time people spend in lifts in that building.
Even rush hour.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's something that still can be looked at. I mean, retrospectively, you can fit those. You do find them more in new builds rather than old, but it is something that can still be looked at. I was aware that at the time when the discussion was being put forward that there were significant questions being raised about spending any more money. So there was a limit put on how much could be spent, and that would be a significant addition. But I think you're right, it is something that many modern builders have, and so it's something we need to look at.
And the further question that I have is just the way in which the suitability of that building was dismissed. There are some of us who have a very strong view about what civic means and whether a former bank building on Albert Street was what we want the public of Auckland to associate with their civic heart. And maybe that's one of those things that's hard to measure, it's not quantifiable, and probably makes even more precious the town hall and the civic building. And you know, we play with that at our peril. So I'm just putting that on the record for today.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I personally don't think it's worth relitigating the purchase. We've got a problem, and it's ours now, and I don't really personally think it's of value discussing going to the civic building or whatever, or any other building at this stage. This is potentially an enormous problem because we don't quite know what's in behind yet. That's why, members, I sent an email, and when the Chief Executive let us know when this problem arose in December, I was quite concerned because, as we all know, we don't like things coming out of left field at us, and management don't like that either, and that's why they're dealing with this. It's one hell of a thing to grapple with. And I've asked the management some questions, and I might just go through some of those because I've got some follow-ups, Chair. But you know, this building is not a new building, but it's a new asset to us. And you know, you learn about a building when you are undertaking due diligence, and you learn so much from a vendor. And sometimes vendors do not disclose. They will have information, and then they won't have the information to furnish to you. And that's just the nature of buying commercial buildings or any building. So I guess my first question is around those warranties and liability, and that's my first question, Kevin. Have we got some further work to do to go back to vendor, and maybe, because it's a little bit complex, because I think there was a tenant that was an owner, and then it became Brookfield's multiplex or something like that. Don't need to go into the detail on that one now, but do we need to do quite a bit more legal work on that, on not just relying on the word of whoever the vendor was about warranties, actually asking them so that we can cite those warranties. Even if they have expired, let's actually cite them and check whether there's something there for us to hang our hat on. I think that's going to be quite important. I'll just run through these things and you can wrap them up if you remember or take notes. So that legal redress is quite important. I note that no warranties were requested at the time. Now, that might have been appropriate, but there's no comeback there. We didn't ask for any warranties, so we've got no further warranties from that contract period. That's correct. There's nothing to hang our hat on there. Okay. And just in terms of the budget, and thanks for the reply, I note that we had about 4,240 identified when we bought the building, and it was 100K in the year of purchase. But in year 13, we were due to do 2.365 of work. I gather we didn't proceed at that time, and we've deferred until now. And then in 17, which is the real money that's looking to be brought forward, I gather, is about just under 1.8. But maybe you'd like to explain the gap between that 4,240, which it adds up to, and the 4,7 here, and the risk of escalation. You know, what's your ballpark on escalation? And then I think we do have something in paragraph 13 that really concerns me. We have got a commercial building, admittedly built in that wonderful 1980s period when Auckland was doing things ballistically and contractors were doing construction pretty badly all over Auckland in the commercial area. We've got non-standard fixing design, insufficient missing and loose bolts, pins, missing packing, deflection in the fixings, corrosion. Now, I noticed the corrosion was picked up in the due diligence, but we didn't know the extent of it. That should have probably sent some signals, but look, all well in hindsight. And then some of the stone has no mechanical fixing whatsoever. It's glued on only. Chair, that is an absolute indictment on whoever the contractor or the subcontractors were. I'm not going to name names here, otherwise me and this council will be in the court.
Sue the council.
But there's a major issue there, and I think we need to hunt down liability really hard before we take it on absolutely.
Right. Okay.
A lot there, Kevin.
Yep.
You know I'm worried, we're all worried about this.
Yes. So just through the chair, pick up a few component pieces there. Maybe start the very last one. The no fixings been identified on panels which were sitting at the very top. So it wasn't actually on the side of the building, it was actually sitting on top. So that's where I think an incorrect call had been made just to use the epoxy to hold that in place as opposed to pinning or fixing. The corrosion, corrosion does occur. Quite often it is superficial, but we'd have to ensure that it's not affecting the integrity of the bolts and the pins in there. But corrosion does quite often occur. I think one of the main reasons it was pointed out was because corrosion means water was in there. And that was probably more of a concern there. Although the water's not affecting the structure of the building, water getting in means the sealant was failing on the panels. Escalation, what we're talking about now, bringing that $4.7 million is not the end by any means. There will be more costs incurred. How much that will cover, we're not sure yet, and I wouldn't like to speculate and call conjecture on what those costs might be. We will come back to a future meeting of this committee once those options are assessed. So what are the options to actually remedy the situation when we know how bad that is, and how much will that cost? We'll come here to talk to you about that one. The whole area of warranties and liability, yep, you are right. We do need to explore that further. We need to in effect exhaust the possibilities. A couple of the fundamentals we have here though are 25-year-old materials, more than likely to be outside of warranty, unlikely to have a 25-year warranty on the products. The other is, as far as warranties for the actual work that was undertaken, usually will be undertaken with the actual person that's paying for the building to be built. Potentially can be passed on through agreements. Once you get 3 or 4 parties down the track, unless those warranties were handed over from one party to the next, you have no redress on those. So whether there's anything more substantive in there, as far as liabilities on the workmanship, we do need to explore that further. Yep. So we'll exhaust those warranty liability issues. before we look at paying for it ourselves. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks,
It's a
Chair.
valid concern, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, some of those the matters I wanted to cover would Councillor Darby's probably asked a question. Well, I see that Councillor Darby has obviously got more information than I have about this, and you know, it just is concerning about the overall cost. I see the Herald talked to Mr. Gray. Was it Mr. Gray from the homeowners and buyers association? And talking about a building in Parnell, which would be half the size of our building, and it was substantial. So that's number one. Obviously, it is going to be substantial. You know, he's talking about 15 million to do a 15-storey building. So, you know, because that then it raises the question: is how long is this going to take? Because you say you'll build a scaffolding at the top, and then goes down 29 stories. Will that require a crane to be built up beside the building to do the work? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, without going into too much detail, until you know what the materials are you're going to use, they'll then dictate the methodology you're going to use to construct it. But look, I mean, Andrew's had experience in these areas before. He's built a plan of possibilities. We are talking at least a year for the full works to be undertaken, potentially longer, because of the nature of the building and the issue. To go up, to remove panels, to put panels back on or replace them or something, you're in a very interesting situation. I think I heard anecdotally there's one crane in New Zealand that could actually reach the top of the building to do that sort of work. So whether it's a crane or another mechanism, there are other better mechanisms to reduce risk that we could actually use here. So all of that will be part of the options paper that comes to the next committee. As far as the more information, by the way, yeah, that was literally, it was a request for some information from the Councillor Darby last night, which you responded to. So yeah, that was seeking clarification on some points. Yep, that's all that was.
Well, can we all get that information circulated to us?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'd just like to see a bit of a schematic of what it's going to look like. You know, what's this scaffolding? What's the outline of that going to be?
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can pull the information pack together with that, plus responses to any questions that we've already answered. Yes.
Councillor Penrose.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, and I can recall the day that, when we debated around the table, and it actually reminds me a bit like our procurement policy when we were dealing with our park stuff, and at the time, there was only 11 councillors around the table, and the vote went 7-5. And I'm pretty sure if you look at the records, that's how it went. And it was a Friday afternoon, summer's afternoon. The numbers around the table hasn't much changed. And I spoke against it for the simple reason being that we hadn't had a full register of assets on the new Auckland Council. And I think Councillor Wood and Councillor Stewart supported it. You'll remember this quite well. And I said at the time, we haven't got a full list of assets. And until we had a full list of assets, we should just tie-ho. The civic building was the civic building. And, you know, I didn't have an issue working in the civic building, knowing the circumstances behind it. But moving on from there, we've moved 3 buildings into one. And if we look at this cost savings over this last probably 3 odd years, or 2 years, would it be 2 years coming up? Looking at the big macro picture here, the shortage of space in office space in Auckland now, buildings themselves in Auckland. I think a number of us around this table would have rental properties or properties of such, and we know that there's cost factors in any building, ongoing costs and repairs. It's always a tricky one. I know the CEO had an offer from an overseas investment company in Europe wanting to purchase it. You know, I think we've got to look at the big picture here. You know, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but, you know, the building itself, it's what, probably 35 stories by the time we take the 4 stories of car parking underneath the basement. It's a massive building. Prime location. Where else would you get that? You know, so I think, you know, it's one of those things, we just got to move with it. And with a building of that size, and where it is, you know, we're going to have costs, and like any building, and it's like a motor vehicle. You buy a motor vehicle and it could be a $150,000 one, and who knows, 3 months later, what could happen to it? So,
Fit
you
for
know,
purpose.
I think, you know, we've just got to get on with the job.
Thank you. Councillor Cracks.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm sort of interested in what happens now, because I notice the options you've got there on page 112, and clearly the do nothing option is not going to, it's not a viable one. You pointed that out. So what